Admiral Vextar floated in his command chamber aboard the flagship Stellar Dominion, his 4 arms moving across holographic displays with practiced efficiency. The blue-skinned Zephyrian had conquered 17 worlds in his career, each one falling within days to his superior technology and overwhelming firepower. Today would be no different. The target was a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system, inhabited by a primitive species called humans. The intelligence reports made for boring reading. These creatures had barely left their own atmosphere, using crude chemical rockets that took months to reach their nearest moon. Their weapons were laughably primitive, still relying on explosive chemicals and basic nuclear fission. Most amusing of all, they spent most of their time fighting each other instead of advancing their civilization. The Galactic Council had classified them as Class C primitives, barely worthy of notice except as potential slave labor. Vextar's fleet consisted of 12 warships, each one capable of destroying entire cities with a single plasma burst. His energy shields had never been penetrated by primitive weapons, and his faster-than-light engines could outrun anything these humans might throw at him. The plan was simple: appear in their system, demonstrate superior firepower, accept their surrender, and begin processing them for the slave markets. It would take 3 days at most. Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his 3rd cup of coffee when the alarm started screaming throughout the USS Liberty. The small reconnaissance vessel was conducting routine patrols near Jupiter, checking for asteroid threats and monitoring deep space communications. Jake had been in space for 15 years and had never seen anything more exciting than a solar flare. So when his sensor operator started shouting about unknown contacts, he assumed it was another equipment malfunction. "Sir, you need to see this," Sergeant Lucy Park called from her station, her voice tight with tension. 12 objects just appeared near Jupiter's orbit. "They're big, sir, really big. And they're accelerating toward the inner system at speeds that should be impossible." Jake moved to her station and stared at the display. The objects were massive, each one the size of a city, and they were moving at a significant fraction of light speed. No known human technology could achieve such velocities, and the energy signatures were unlike anything in their databases. His hands were steady as he reached for the communications panel, but his heart was racing. General Lisa Hayes was reviewing supply reports in her office, deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, when the emergency alert came through. NORAD's early warning. Systems, designed primarily to track incoming missiles and space debris, had detected multiple unidentified objects entering the solar system at impossible speeds. Within minutes, observatories around the world confirmed what she had hoped was a false alarm. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and their visitors didn't appear to be friendly. She activated the global defense network with a series of commands that she had hoped never to use. Hidden throughout the solar system, disguised as mining stations and research facilities, humanity's secret weapons began powering up. For 50 years, paranoid military planners had prepared for this exact scenario, building defenses that most people didn't even know existed. The question now was whether their preparations would be enough. Dr. Karen White watched the approaching fleet from her laboratory in Colorado, her fingers dancing across multiple keyboards as she coordinated with military installations around the globe. As the head of the Xenobiology Research Division, she had spent her career studying the possibility of alien life. Now that possibility had become a terrifying reality, and everything she had theorized about first contact was being thrown out. The window. The alien ships showed no attempt at communication, no signs of peaceful intent. They were moving in a military formation, their energy signatures suggesting weapons far beyond human capability. Karen had always hoped that first contact would be a moment of wonder and discovery. Instead, it looked like it would be humanity's final exam, and failure meant extinction. Admiral Vextar studied the primitive planet as his fleet entered the inner system. The humans had managed to place some basic satellites in orbit and had established a few small outposts on their moon, but nothing that posed any threat to his forces. Their largest military installations were on the planet's surface, where they would be easy targets for orbital bombardment. He had seen this pattern dozens of times before. A young species that had never faced a real threat, completely unprepared for the reality of galactic warfare. His tactical officer reported multiple small vessels moving throughout the system, but they were clearly civilian craft with minimal armament. A few appeared to be moving toward defensive positions, but their primitive weapons would be useless against Zephyrian shields. The entire engagement would be over before it began. Captain Jake Morrison received his orders directly from NORAD. Maintain position and observe, but do not engage unless directly threatened. The Liberty was armed with only basic defensive weapons, nothing that could damage a ship the size of the alien vessels. His job was to gather intelligence and relay it to Earth, hoping that the information might help in whatever desperate plan the generals were developing. As the alien fleet moved past Jupiter, Jake noticed something that made his blood run cold. The ships weren't just moving toward Earth. They were actively scanning everything in their path, cataloging human installations and technology. This wasn't a peaceful exploration mission. It was a military reconnaissance in force, the kind that preceded total conquest. The first communication from the alien fleet came 18 hours after their arrival, broadcast on multiple frequencies in broken English. The voice was cold and mechanical, clearly generated by some kind of translation device. The message was brief and to the point. Primitive humans of the third planet, you will prepare for immediate surrender and processing. Resistance is futile. Compliance ensures survival. General Lisa Hayes listened to the message 3 times before responding. Her reply was equally brief and considerably less polite. Unknown vessels, you have entered sovereign Earth space without permission. Turn around now, or we'll send you home in pieces. The alien response came quickly. Your primitive weapons cannot harm our vessels. Surrender now, or we will demonstrate the futility of resistance. Lisa smiled grimly as she gave the order that would change everything. All stations, this is Mountain Home. Execute Operation Thunderbolt. Show these bastards what happens when you mess with Earth. Admiral Vexstar decided to demonstrate his fleet's power with a surgical strike against what appeared to be a major human space installation. The structure orbited Earth at a distance that suggested it was important, possibly a command center or weapons platform. His tactical computers identified it as the perfect target for a show of force that would break human resistance without requiring a full planetary bombardment. The plasma cannon charged with a low humming sound that resonated through the ship's hull. Vexstar had used this same weapon to destroy the orbital fortresses of a dozen worlds, watching as enemy defenses crumbled before his superior technology. The beam lanced out across space, a brilliant green line of concentrated energy that could vaporize a mountain. It struck the human station dead center, exactly as planned. What happened next defied every tactical manual in the Zephyrian military archives. Instead of disintegrating under the plasma assault, the station exploded with the force of a small star. The detonation was so violent that it created a temporary gravitational anomaly, pulling 3 of Vexstar's ships into its expanding field of destruction. The energy wave that followed melted armor plating and overloaded shield generators across half his fleet. Colonel Danny Brooks watched the explosion from his observation post on Luna Station, allowing himself a moment of savage satisfaction. This space station had been nothing more than a shell packed with antimatter warheads, positioned specifically to lure an overconfident enemy into exactly this kind of mistake. Humanity had learned long ago that the best traps were the ones that looked like targets worth hitting. The antimatter had been harvested from experimental starship drives over the past 20 years, stored in magnetic containment fields that would rupture the moment the station took damage. The humans had essentially turned their own failed technology into the galaxy's largest booby trap, and it had worked better than anyone had dared hope. Admiral Vexstar stared at his tactical display in shock as 3 of his finest warships simply ceased to exist. The explosion had been unlike anything in his experience, releasing energy levels that suggested the humans possessed weapons technology far beyond what their intelligence reports had indicated. For the first time in his career, he felt something that his species had bred out of their military caste centuries ago: uncertainty. His remaining ships moved into a defensive formation, energy shields at maximum power. The tactical officer reported massive energy signatures throughout the asteroid belt, suggesting that the humans had more surprises waiting. What kind of primitive species booby-trapped their own space installations with weapons of such devastating power? The answer came in the form of a swarm of nuclear-tipped missiles launched from hidden positions throughout the outer system. Human mining ships that had been converted into missile platforms began revealing themselves, firing salvo after salvo of warheads that painted space with radioactive fire. The Zephyrians had expected clean fusion weapons, if anything. Instead, they found themselves facing dirty fission bombs that turned the vacuum of space into a poisonous wasteland. Dr. Karen White coordinated the missile strikes from her command center, watching as human ingenuity compensated for technological inferiority. The submarines that had been secretly modified for orbital bombardment were firing their payloads from Earth's oceans, adding their firepower to the growing barrage of destruction surrounding the alien fleet. The Zephyrian energy shields, designed to deflect coherent energy beams, proved surprisingly vulnerable to solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. The human missiles weren't sophisticated, but they were numerous, and they carried warheads specifically designed to penetrate. Advanced defensive systems. Each impact sent shockwaves through the alien ships, gradually wearing down their protective barriers. Captain Roy Martinez led a squadron of modified cargo haulers that had been disguised as civilian vessels throughout the outer system. As the alien fleet focused on the missile barrage, his ships moved into position for the next phase of Operation Thunderbolt. Each cargo hauler contained a full company of Space Marines equipped with weapons and armor specifically designed for boarding actions in zero gravity. The Marines had trained for this scenario for over a decade, studying captured alien technology and developing tactics for close-quarters combat in spacecraft. A war-powered armor that could function in hard vacuum, carried weapons that could penetrate advanced hull materials, and had been selected for their ability to fight effectively in three-dimensional combat environments. Admiral Vexstar watched in growing horror as his tactical situation deteriorated. The human weapons were crude but effective, and their tactics showed a level of strategic thinking that his intelligence reports had completely missed. These creatures weren't just using superior numbers. They were using their environment as a weapon, turning space itself into a battlefield that favored their unconventional approach to warfare. The missile swarm was followed by kinetic projectiles launched from mass drivers hidden throughout the asteroid belt. Simple chunks of metal accelerated to significant fractions of light speed, each one carrying enough kinetic energy to crack a battleship in half. The Zephyrians discovered that human miners had spent decades perfecting the art of moving large objects at high speeds, and that expertise translated directly into devastating weapons of war. Sergeant Lucy Park monitored the battle from the USS Liberty, recording everything for transmission back to Earth. The human forces were fighting with a ferocity that surprised even their own commanders, showing tactical flexibility that came from centuries of warfare against their own species. Every engagement revealed new innovations, new ways of turning everyday technology into instruments of destruction. The first Zephyrian ship to fall victim to human boarding tactics was the cruiser Knight's Edge. Captain Martinez's Marines breached the hull using shaped charges developed from mining explosives, then fought their way through corridors designed for species that had never experienced shipboard combat. The aliens found themselves facing opponents who seemed to enjoy fighting in the cramped, dangerous environment of a damaged spacecraft. Human Marines moved through the ship like predators, using their knowledge of three-dimensional tactics to outmaneuver defenders who had been trained for planetary combat. The Zephyrians discovered that humans had turned zero-gravity warfare into an art form, flowing through their ships like water, striking from unexpected angles, and disappearing into maintenance passages that no civilized species would consider. Using for military purposes, Admiral Vextar's final tactical report to the Galactic Council was transmitted as his flagship came under direct assault from human boarding parties. His voice was strained with an emotion that his species rarely experienced: fear. The humans weren't just winning. They were enjoying it, celebrating each victory with enthusiasm that suggested they had been waiting their entire lives for exactly this kind of challenge. Transmission cut off as human Marines breached the command deck, their battle cries echoing through corridors that had never heard the sounds of hand-to-hand combat. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their numbers, but their absolute refusal to fight fair when their survival was at stake. The surviving Zephyrian ships attempted to retreat beyond Earth's defensive perimeter, but Admiral Vextar quickly discovered that humanity had spent decades preparing for exactly this scenario. Hidden throughout the outer system, disguised as civilian vessels and mining equipment, human forces had created a web of defensive positions that turned retreat into another kind of trap. Captain Roy Martinez commanded a squadron of cargo haulers that had been converted into Trojan horses, each one packed with boarding parties, equipped for extended combat in zero gravity. As the alien ships tried to escape, these seemingly harmless vessels moved to intercept them, revealing their true nature only when it was too late for the enemy to respond effectively. The Zephyrians had conquered dozens of worlds, but they had never encountered a species that preferred close-quarters combat in the vacuum of space. Their military doctrine was based on long-range engagements using superior technology to overwhelm primitive opponents. The concept of boarding enemy ships and fighting hand-to-hand in damaged spacecraft was completely alien to their way of thinking. Human Marines breached the alien hulls using techniques developed from decades of dangerous mining operations in asteroid fields. They moved through the ships like hunters, using their knowledge of three-dimensional tactics to outmaneuver defenders who had been trained for planetary surface combat. The powered armor they wore had been designed specifically for this environment, allowing them to fight effectively even in hard vacuum. Sergeant Tony Blake led the assault on the Zephyrian cruiser Star Render, his squad moving through the ship's corridors with practiced efficiency. The aliens had never faced opponents who seemed to thrive in the cramped, dangerous environment of a damaged spacecraft. Every human Marine had trained extensively in zero-gravity combat, turning what should have been a disadvantage into a tactical advantage. The Zephyrians discovered that humans had developed weapons specifically designed for shipboard combat, tools that could penetrate advanced armor without risking catastrophic hull breaches. Human engineers had spent years studying alien technology captured from crashed probes, developing countermeasures for every defensive system the enemy possessed. Meanwhile, on Earth's surface, the invasion's ground forces faced an entirely different nightmare. Major Beth Collins coordinated resistance cells that had learned urban warfare from centuries of human conflict. The aliens found that every human city was a fortress, every civilian a potential combatant, and every building a possible trap filled with explosives and hidden weapons. The Zephyrian ground troops had expected to face organized military units using conventional tactics. Instead, they found themselves fighting an entire population that seemed to have been born for warfare. Human civilians used improvised weapons with deadly effectiveness, turning everyday objects into instruments of fun. Destruction. Children threw homemade bombs from rooftops, while grandmothers sniped at alien patrols from hidden positions. Lieutenant. Commander Sarah Mills led a unit of human forces in the defense of Chicago, using tactics that had been developed during the street fighting of previous human wars. The aliens had superior individual weapons, but they had never faced an enemy that turned entire cities into killing fields. Every street became a choke point, every building a potential ambush site. The Zephyrians had advanced medical technology that could heal most wounds, but they had never encountered weapons designed specifically to cause maximum suffering with minimum resources. Human fighters used booby traps that had been perfected during centuries of irregular warfare, devices that were cheap to make, but devastatingly effective against overconfident invaders. Captain Jake Morrison continued monitoring the battle from orbit, relaying tactical information to ground forces, while coordinating with the boarding parties that were systematically capturing alien ships. The humans were fighting with a level of coordination that suggested extensive preparation, as if they had been planning for this exact scenario for decades. The reality was that humanity had been preparing for alien invasion since the first radio telescopes had started scanning the skies. Military planners had developed contingency plans for every possible first contact scenario, with particular emphasis on hostile encounters. The current battle was the culmination of 50 years of paranoid preparation and strategic thinking. Dr. Karen White monitored the engagement from her command center, analyzing alien technology as quickly as human forces could capture it. Every piece of equipment they seized revealed new weaknesses that could be exploited, new ways to turn superior alien technology against its creators. Human engineers were already adapting captured weapons for use against their former owners. The alien forces had never faced an enemy that learned so quickly from each engagement. Human tactical doctrine emphasized flexibility and adaptation, traits that served them well against an opponent who relied on superior technology rather than tactical innovation. Every battle revealed new human capabilities that the aliens had never encountered before. Admiral Vexstar found himself trapped aboard his flagship as human boarding parties systematically captured his fleet. The creatures seemed to relish close combat, laughing as they fought through his ship's corridors and singing war songs as they engaged his security forces. Their behavior was unlike anything in the galactic military databases. The humans didn't fight to capture territory or resources. They fought to completely destroy anything that threatened them. Every engagement revealed a level of creative violence that unnerved even experienced Zephyrian commanders. These creatures had turned warfare into an art form, developing techniques that were both brutally effective and psychologically devastating. Radio intercepts revealed human forces requesting more targets when their ammunition ran low, celebrating each victory with an enthusiasm that suggested they genuinely enjoyed combat. The aliens began to realize that they weren't fighting a primitive species trying to defend its territory. They were fighting apex predators that viewed the invasion as an entertaining challenge. Major Beth Collins received reports from Resistance cells around the globe, each one describing the same phenomenon. Human forces were not just winning individual engagements, they were completely breaking alien morale. Zephyrian troops were surrendering rather than face human fighters, who seemed to become more dangerous with each battle. The aliens had expected to face a species that would fight desperately for survival. Instead, they found themselves confronting creatures that had spent their entire evolutionary history finding new and creative ways to kill each other. Humanity's greatest weakness had become their ultimate strength. They were simply better at warfare than any species the galaxy had ever produced. Admiral Vexstar, final transmission to his home fleet, was barely coherent, filled with references to Deathworld predators and creatures that laugh while they kill. The transmission ended abruptly as human Marines breached his command center, their battle cries echoing through corridors that had never heard the sounds of hand-to-hand combat. The galaxy was about to learn that Earth's most dangerous export wasn't technology or culture, but the simple fact that humans had never learned to fight fair when their survival was at stake. The news of humanity's devastating counterattack spread through the galaxy faster than light, carried by automated distress beacons and the few Zephyrian survivors who had escaped the Sol system. The Galactic Council, composed of 15 advanced species that had maintained peace for over 1,000 years, watched in stunned silence as the tactical recordings arrived at their headquarters on the neutral world of Kepler Prime. Ambassador Trillex of the Harmony Collective studied the battle, footage with growing alarm, his 6 eyes tracking multiple data streams simultaneously. The Harmony Collective was known throughout the galaxy for their advanced military analysis, but nothing in their databases had prepared them for what they were witnessing. The humans had turned their entire solar system into a weapon, using every available resource to create a defensive network that was both brutally effective and terrifyingly creative. The tactical recordings showed human forces using their own infrastructure as ammunition, converting mining equipment into weapons of war, and turning civilian vessels into military assets. Most disturbing of all, the creatures seemed to enjoy the process, celebrating each victory with an enthusiasm that suggested they had been waiting their entire lives for exactly this kind of challenge. Counselor HFY of the Scientific Assembly paused the recordings at the moment when human boarding parties breached the Zephyrian flagship. The images showed creatures moving through damaged spacecraft with the fluid grace of predators in their natural environment. These beings had turned zero-gravity combat into an art form, fighting with a level of three-dimensional awareness that took most species centuries to develop. The Scientific Assembly had studied thousands of species during their expansion across the galaxy, cataloging their development patterns and technological progress. Most civilizations followed predictable paths, developing advanced technology through cooperation and peaceful exploration. Humanity appeared to be an evolutionary anomaly, a species that had achieved technological advancement through constant warfare and creative violence. On Earth, President Alan Carter addressed the United Nations in a speech that would later be studied throughout the galaxy. His words were broadcast on every human communication network and transmitted into space on multiple frequencies, ensuring that any listening alien civilization would receive the message clearly. The tone was calm and measured, but the content was unmistakably threatening. "We didn't ask for this fight," Carter said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came from leading a species that had just proven its military capabilities. "But since you brought it to our doorstep, we'll finish it on our terms." Any species considering invasion should ask themselves one question: are you prepared to face a world where every human is a soldier, every tool is a weapon, and every victory only makes us more dangerous? The speech was accompanied by detailed recordings of the battle, showing exactly how humanity's improvised defenses had dismantled a technologically superior force. The images were carefully edited to emphasize the creative brutality of human tactics, ensuring that any potential enemies would understand exactly what they would be facing if they chose to threaten. Earth. Dr. Sandra Lewis led humanity's first xenobiology team in examining captured alien technology, making discoveries that would reshape their understanding of galactic civilization. The Zephyrian equipment was advanced, but specialized, designed for specific tactical situations rather than the kind of improvised combat that humans excelled at. The aliens had never needed to develop the kind of flexible, adaptable technology that characterized human military equipment. More disturbing was the revelation that the galaxy was filled with species that had evolved in relatively peaceful environments, developing technology through cooperation and shared knowledge. Most alien civilizations had never experienced the kind of intensive, creative warfare that had shaped human development. They were technologically advanced, but tactically naive, unprepared for opponents who viewed every engagement as a puzzle, to be solved through violence and cunning. The Galactic Council faced an unprecedented situation as reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire, once one of the most feared military powers in known space, had been reduced to scattered refugees begging for sanctuary. Their surviving ships bore warning beacons that identified them as victims of the Sol incident, a designation that was already becoming synonymous with military disaster. Ambassador Cathara of the Trade Federation analyzed the economic implications of humanity's emergence as a galactic power. The species had demonstrated technological capabilities that their intelligence reports had completely missed, suggesting that their entire assessment of human civilization had been fundamentally flawed. These creatures weren't primitive at all. They were apex predators who had been masquerading as a developing species. The Trade Federation's economic models had to be completely revised to account for a civilization that could convert civilian infrastructure into military assets within hours. Human industrial capacity was far greater than anyone had realized, and their ability to improvise weapons from common materials made them virtually impossible to disarm through economic sanctions or technological restrictions. General Lisa Hayes coordinated with newly established diplomatic teams as alien ambassadors began requesting meetings with human representatives. The requests came with an undertone of desperation that hadn't been present in galactic communications for centuries. Species that had never shown fear before were suddenly very interested in establishing peaceful relations with the Deathworlders from Sol System. The first official diplomatic contact came from the Peaceful Assembly, a coalition of species known for their commitment to nonviolence and conflict resolution. Their message was formal but clearly nervous, requesting permission to establish communication protocols and discussing mutual defense agreements. The subtext was obvious. They wanted to ensure that humanity's newly demonstrated military capabilities would never be turned against them. Captain Jake Morrison found himself assigned to humanity's first diplomatic mission, commanding a vessel that had been hastily converted from a cargo hauler into something resembling a proper diplomatic ship. The irony wasn't lost on him that the same improvised approach that had won the war was now being applied to galactic diplomacy. The journey to Proxima Station, the galaxy's primary trade hub, took 3 weeks using captured alien faster-than-light technology. The human delegation was small but carefully chosen, representing the kind of practical, no-nonsense approach that had characterized their military victory. They weren't diplomats in the traditional sense. They were soldiers and engineers who had proven their competence in the crucible of combat. Dr. Karen White accompanied the diplomatic mission as humanity's first xenospecialist, tasked with studying alien psychology and social structures. Her preliminary reports suggested that most galactic species had never developed the kind of hierarchical military structures that characterized human civilization. They were cooperative by nature, making them poorly suited for the kind of intensive warfare that humans considered routine. The implications were staggering. Humanity had emerged into a galaxy populated by species that were technologically advanced, but militarily incompetent. The humans weren't just dangerous because of their weapons or tactics. They were dangerous because they thought about conflict in ways that no other species could understand or countergot. As the human diplomatic ship approached Proxima Station, sensor readings showed dozens of alien vessels changing course to avoid them. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable: fear. The galaxy had learned that Earth's inhabitants weren't just another primitive species struggling to reach the stars. They were something far more dangerous, a civilization that had turned warfare into a science and seemed to genuinely enjoy the challenge of impossible odds. 6 months after the failed invasion, The galaxy had restructured around a new reality that nobody had anticipated. The Galactic Council formally recognized Earth as a sovereign world with full diplomatic status, but the recognition came with a mixture of respect and barely concealed terror. Humanity had not just won a war against superior technology. They had rewritten the fundamental rules of galactic warfare in the process. Captain Steve Johnson commanded the first human vessel to visit the Galactic Trade Hub at Proxima Station, a massive structure that served as the economic and cultural center for dozens of species. The reaction to his arrival was immediate and visible throughout the station's corridors in commercial districts. Alien species that had never shown fear before cleared pathways as humans passed, whispered among themselves about the Death Worlders, and watched every human movement with a wariness usually reserved for natural disasters. The station's administrator, a multi-limbed creature from the Centauri Collective, greeted the human delegation with formal courtesy that couldn't quite hide his nervousness. His species had evolved in a peaceful ocean environment and had never experienced warfare more intensive than minor territorial disputes. The concept of a civilization that had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing was completely foreign to his understanding of social development. Johnson noticed that every alien he encountered seemed to know exactly who he was and what his species had done to the Zephyrian Empire. The story had spread throughout the galaxy with the speed that only truly terrifying news could achieve. Humans weren't just another species reaching for the stars. They were apex predators who had turned their entire solar system into a weapon and seemed to enjoy using it. The Zephyrian Empire, once a dominant military force that had conquered 17 worlds, had been reduced to a cautionary tale told in hushed voices throughout the galaxy. Their surviving ships bore warning beacons that identified them as refugees from the Sol incident, and their crews refused to speak of Earth without visible signs of psychological trauma. The few survivors who had escaped the human counterattack described creatures that laughed while fighting and seemed to become more dangerous with each engagement. Director Helen Cruz established Earth's first diplomatic corps in a converted military facility outside Geneva, but their primary function wasn't traditional negotiation. Instead, they served as a combination intelligence agency and threat assessment team, evaluating every species that approached humanity and determining whether they represented potential A's, trading partners, or future enemies that needed to be monitored. The diplomatic protocols that evolved reflected humanity's practical approach to galactic relations. Human ambassadors were typically former military officers who understood both strategy and tactics, capable of recognizing threats and responding appropriately. Their meetings with alien representatives followed patterns that had been developed during centuries of human warfare, emphasizing strength, reliability, and the clear communication of consequences for hostile action. Dr. Sandra Lewis continued her analysis of alien psychology from her expanded laboratory complex, now equipped with technology captured from multiple species. Her findings confirmed what the battle had already demonstrated. Most galactic civilizations had never developed the kind of military thinking that humans considered basic common sense. They were collaborative by nature, poorly suited for the kind of intensive, creative warfare that had shaped human development. The economic implications of humanity's emergence were staggering. Species that had dominated galactic trade for centuries found themselves reevaluating their positions in light of Earth's demonstrated capabilities. Human industrial capacity was far greater than initial assessments had suggested, and their ability to convert civilian infrastructure into military assets made them virtually impossible to threaten through economic pressure. Major Beth Collins, now promoted to colonel and assigned to the Galactic Defense Initiative, coordinated with allied species that were beginning to request human military advisors. The requests came from civilizations that had suddenly realized how vulnerable they were to the kind of aggressive expansion that the Zephyrians had practiced. These species wanted to learn human tactical doctrine, not because they planned to become conquerors, but because they needed to defend themselves against others who might try. The training programs that developed were carefully designed to teach defensive tactics rather than offensive capabilities. Humanity had no interest in creating additional military threats, but they were willing to help peaceful species protect themselves against potential aggressors. The irony wasn't lost on human military planners that they were becoming the galaxy's primary source of expertise on defensive warfare. Captain Jake Morrison found himself assigned to the newly created Galactic Patrol, a joint human-alien organization, tasked with maintaining peace in regions where traditional diplomatic solutions had failed. The patrol vessels were equipped with human weapons and crewed by mixed teams that combined human tactical expertise with alien technological capabilities. The patrol missions revealed the extent to which humanity's reputation had spread throughout the galaxy. Pirates and raiders who had operated with impunity for decades suddenly found themselves facing opponents who fought with a level of creative violence that they had never encountered. The mere presence of human crew members was often enough to deter aggressive action. As word spread that these creatures treated combat as an entertaining challenge rather than a desperate last resort, a final Galactic Council session that addressed the human question was recorded and distributed throughout known space, serving as both official policy and practical warning to any species that might consider testing Earth's defenses. The discussion was led by Ambassador Trillex, whose Harmony Collective had become humanity's most reliable allies in galactic politics. The emergence of humanity forces us to reconsider our fundamental assumptions about civilization and development. Trillex stated in his opening remarks, "We have encountered a species that achieved technological advancement through constant warfare rather than peaceful cooperation. They represent both an opportunity for enhanced galactic security and a reminder of how dangerous the universe can be for unprepared civilizations." The Council's final resolution recognized humanity as a strategic partner rather than a simple member species, acknowledging their unique role as the galaxy's primary military power. The designation came with both privileges and responsibilities, including the expectation that humans would help maintain galactic peace while respecting the sovereignty of species that posed no threat to Earth or its allies. An unnamed council member's closing statement captured the new reality that every galactic civilization would have to accept. The question is no longer whether we can coexist with humanity, but whether we can learn from them quickly enough to survive in a universe that may contain other species equally dangerous and far less interested in peaceful cooperation. The recording ended with statistical data that would be studied by military academies throughout the galaxy for generations to come. In 6 days of fighting, humanity had destroyed a fleet that had conquered 17 worlds, captured advanced technology worth trillions of credits, and established themselves as the galactic community's most effective military force. Most importantly, they had done it while enjoying themselves, turning what should have been a desperate fight for survival into an entertaining demonstration of tactical superiority. The galaxy had learned the hardest lesson possible: never underestimate a species that considers warfare an art form and views impossible odds as a personal challenge. Humanity had taken their place among the stars, not as conquerors or diplomats, but as the one civilization that every other species hoped they would never have to fight against.